Stan was, and in respect to women, adored them, chased them. So in effect, that ultimately, of course, got him in trouble.
What will I do? Be big!
Stan's weakness for women made his married life chaotic.
In a sense, he became, as his character was, a bit childlike, in that maybe these were not very adult relationships.
After 9 years of marriage, Lois finally had enough of his philandering ways and divorced him in 1935.
After the divorce with Lois, there came this rather hectic marital period.
He next married Ruth Rogers, not once, but twice, in 1935 and in 1941.
This was another kind of relationship between successful, quite successful by that time, Hollywood star and a woman who was very pretty and very personable and very charming, but essentially didn't really have a career of her own, and so became a kind of second stringer and was not that happy to be in that sort of relationship.
And then he married this incredible, what would you call her? Performer, I guess, named Ileana, the Russian lady. And I think it's safe to say that he was driven to drink by this formidable lady.
Stan's past also caught up with him when his old vaudevillian partner May Dahlberg paid him an unexpected visit.
She came back to this country, and Stan by that time was famous, and she sued him on the grounds that she was Mrs. Stan Laurel in fact, if not legally. And she wanted a portion of his earnings. And she got a portion of his earnings.
Oliver Hardy wasn't faring any better either. He'd married Myrtle in 1921, and though he was faithful to her, there were problems.
Myrtle had developed a chronic drink problem, and he spent a lot of money paying for her care in various establishments. Caused him a lot of heartbreak, and I rather wonder if that might not have influenced him to spending a lot more time socialising in the country club, being a gregarious man anyway, of course, was part of that. But who wants to go home when the wife is ill or not even there?
You know, I feel as fidgety as a jitterbug.
You do?
Yeah.
What's the matter?
Well, I'm nervous. You know, Stanley, this will be the first time I've ever been married.
Fortune was to smile on Ollie, though, when in 1939, on the set of The Flying Deuces, he met and later married script girl Lucille Jones.
I'll tell her for you.
As script girl, she had responsibility for continuity and that type of thing. And there was an accident on set. She tripped and bashed her head, and he'd sent her flowers and she was touched, but she didn't regard it as any more than a friendly professional gesture. What she didn't know was that all this time this famous comedian was falling in love with him. Out of the blue, he just said, you know, will you marry me? And she accepted, rather impulsively. Then, having accepted the marriage proposal, she went on her first date with him.
I mean, he's crazy about you. He's going to marry you, aren't you, Ollie? Go on, stop pumping.
You want to marry me?
Well, that is, if you don't mind.
Now happily remarried and settled with Lucille, a different Oliver began to emerge.
He hated being fat. And it's something that too many people didn't know that, because with other people he would just laugh and say, well, that's the way, that's my bread and butter. I have to be big, you know, on that, and he would ridicule it in that way. But with me, he would, I knew how he felt, and he would, many times, he would stand and he'd walk up behind me. For instance, I'd be at my dressing table or I'd be in front of a mirror, and he'd walk up behind me and he'd say, look at me, look at me. How could you love a great big fat man like me? I mean, that's something I've never told anyone before in my life, but it was, I mean, it's one of those little personal things that do happen between a man and the wife.
Both Ollie and Stan's confidence took a further knock when they returned to filmmaking in 1941. Now free of their Hal Roach contract, they signed to 20th Century Fox, full of hope. But although the films they made were financially successful, creatively they were dead in the water.
Here they come, the bigwigs of Bedlam, the nabobs of nonsense, the headmen of horseplay, the titans of turmoil, Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy, all set to take you on a roller coaster of mad mirth in their latest, greatest, and funniest 20th Century Fox comedy, The Dancing Masters.
For the most part, they aren't very good for the simple reason that they were hired as actors. Suddenly, Stan Laurel was not unofficially directing, he wasn't heading a gag team, he wasn't editing, he wasn't doing anything behind the camera. They were just, for the most part, given scripts by the big studios and told to get on and do it.
My foot's gone to sleep.
Is there anything I can do to make you comfortable?
What are you whispering about?
I didn't want to wake your foot up.
Oh.
Laurel and Hardy were handed scripts, and they were told to follow the scripts. They never did that. But at MGM and Fox, they had to do it the studio way. Sheer stupidity.
When you look at Laurel and Hardy's work, you have to say that at least half of it wasn't terribly good.
What's the combination to this thing?
2 turns to the left.
1, 2. What do you mean, 2 turns to the
Hold
left?
this a minute. 1, 2.
I mean, they were wonderful, but the scripts weren't terribly good, the films weren't terribly good.
So, as a consequence, they turned out a series of features that they hated and which damaged their reputation in the film business, at least in the United States. And by 1945, they'd had enough.
Stan felt humiliated by their experiences at Fox and MGM. They were by now both middle-aged men, and when the Fox contract ended in 1945, they were ready to finish their film career, after over 100 films together. But then, in 1946, a surprising job offer came from Europe. Starved of entertainment throughout the war, there was a real public thirst for live theatre. Stan and Ollie were still Europe's biggest comedy double act, and so they toured to packed houses across the continent.
They had no idea that the reception was going to be quite as it turned out to be, because as the ship was pulling in, word had gone around that Laurel and Hardy were coming, and all of the church bells started to play their cuckoo theme. And apparently, because they weren't expecting this, they thought, what's all this for? But then they heard their theme and thought, they realised it was for them, and they just looked at each other and cried.
There were mobs of people at every station, and they have Laurel and Hardy masks. We'd never seen them. So lining up at the station are all of these people. Half of them are wearing the Laurel masks and half of them Hardy masks. At every station, the train would stop. We found out later what had happened. The engineer had phoned the station ahead and said Laurel and Hardy are aboard. So the train would stop at every station, and here are these mobs of people. They're reaching through the train windows to shake hands, just to touch them.
Anything especially you want to do over here, Oliver? Nothing, but try and make the people happy, and will you keep quiet a minute? And have a good time, and have everyone else have a good time. I'm talking to the gentleman. Will you keep quiet just a moment? And then I think that after a couple of weeks we might... What is it? You're standing on my foot. Oh, I'm sorry.